She mourns in black, but her secrets burn darker still. Welcome to Marple Mysteries. I am your host, Harrington. Tell me where you're listening from. I value your voices. The story begins. If you want to see Nero Wolfe move with speed, you'll have better luck watching Glacier's audition for chorus work. The man is consistent. He rises at 9, tends orchids from 9 to 11, eats with the fidelity of a rail schedule, and keeps his chair from acquiring a personality disorder by sitting in it like a granite Buddha. I'm not complaining. It makes my job easier when the boss behaves like an immovable object, and the world kindly brings its problems on a tray. The problem that came in that afternoon didn't bother with a tray. It arrived in the shape of a woman who should have been an event, and instead was a silence. The kind of silence people bring home from a funeral and keep on the mantel. She didn't call first. She didn't send a card. She rang the bell at 3:02, which I know because I was, for once, entering up-to-date notes, and the clock on my desk had just clicked over from the insultingly honest 3:01. When I opened the door, I got the feeling you get before a summer storm, clean air with trouble behind it. "Archie Goodwin," she said. Not a question the way most people ask it. More like a statement to make me prove her wrong. "That depends," I told her. "If you've come to sell encyclopedias, I'm Ainsworth P. Butterworth, and I can't read." Her lips made a shape that might have been a smile in a previous decade, then retired. She was in her 40s if she'd let the calendar speak, earlier if she hadn't. Mourning black with a coat that didn't need to try. No perfume I could place, just the clean, cold scent that comes off a coin pulled from a fountain. "I'm here to see Mr. Wolfe," she said. "You'll tell him this is a courtesy he will not be offered twice." "Lady," I said, "if you knew how allergic he is to courtesies, you'd bring an EpiPen." But I stepped aside. You don't use sarcasm as a lock. It's more of a porch light. We did the march down the hall. Fritz poked his head out of the kitchen with a spoon like a small flag of truce. He took in the outfit and the temperature and retreated, which was prudent. I opened the office door and let the silence go in first. Wolfe was at his desk with a book propped like a monument. He gave her the glance he gives newcomers when he's measuring the size of the trespass and the thickness of the wallet. She waited until he closed the book, which she knew he would, and crossed to the red leather chair facing him. "I did not invite you," Wolfe said, "nor did Mr. Goodwin announce you. You have exceeded the usual quota of presumption in a very short time." "Mr. Wolfe," she replied, sitting, "I'm told you often begin by disliking your clients. It saves effort later. Shall we start there?" He pushed the book aside and regarded her properly, which meant opening the eyes all the way. "We shall begin," he said, "with your name." "Vera Calidora Sparrow." She didn't offer a hand. In that room, hands shake only when money changes ownership or someone has an attack. For practical purposes, people call me Vera Sparrow. The name sent a little ripple up the back of my neck that wasn't the radiator. I had heard it. The papers sometimes used it when they were discussing apostles of philanthropy with very clean hands and shadows taller than buildings. A widow, thrice, if you listened to the gossip and counted morals as well as marriages. A widow whose late husbands left behind warehouses of legitimate enterprise and a neat portfolio of friends who never filed tax returns without a nervous prayer. Wolfe must have recognized it too because he let his eyelids half close again. That was a sign of interest or indigestion. It's hard to tell. "You are accompanied by the aura of notoriety," he said. "Please do not deposit it on my rug. Mr. Goodwin, beer." It wasn't a bad sign. If Wolfe accepts hydration, he's planning to use oxygen. I went to the cabinet, pulled a bottle of the house brew, and returned. He looked at the label as if checking it for her fingerprints, then nodded. I set it on the desk, just within his reach. He didn't reach, which told me he wanted her to think she wasn't worth the lift. "Mr. Wolfe," she said, "I'm here for a consultation." I will pay your fee. I will not disclose my business outside this room, and I expect you to listen without interrupting. If you choose to intervene after, that will be another conversation." "Madam," Wolfe said, "you misapprehend the arrangement. I listen when it suits me, speak when it pleases me, and interrupt when it becomes necessary. State your business." She did something with her shoulders that was either bracing for weather or discarding it. "I'm being extorted," she said. That word gets thrown around a lot like rice at a wedding. In this case, it landed with more weight than usual. Wolfe had still not touched the burr. "Extorted," he repeated. "By whom and for what? If I knew the first, Mr. Wolfe, I would not be here. As for the second, for choosing not to be the person they would like me to be." "Clarify," Wolfe said. She looked at me. "Everything I say is to both of you," she said. "Mr. Goodwin can keep his ears. I'm accustomed to men who prefer to rent them." Wolfe gave me a half-inch of head turn, the limit allowed. I kept my face where it belonged. "I receive letters," she said. 3 so far, each delivered to my house by hand, not by post. Thin envelopes, onion paper, typed on what I suspect is a portable. No fingerprints, no stupid threats. They are instructions disguised as invitations. "Attend this gathering. Offer this donation. Extend this appointment." Each time I have declined. And each time something I value becomes rearranged. Vandalism. Curated misplacement. The first time it was a book, an old Greek text that belonged to my father. Gone from my library. Returned 2 days later, placed on the piano, dusted and tied with a ribbon cut from one of my gowns. The second time, a portrait of my late husband moved to the top of the stairwell and lit as if by a stage manager with a spiritual agenda. The third time, she looked at me again, then back to Wolfe. The third time I found my safe open. No money missing. A small tin of saffron removed from a locked box and placed on my bedside table. "You keep saffron in your safe," Wolfe said, and there was the faintest tremor of curiosity. Food is the skeleton key to his attention. "I do," she said evenly. "It is Iranian, aged and rare, a gift from a man who could afford to be generous only once." "And the letters?" Wolfe asked. "You brought them." "I did not," she said. "I burned them." That got me. I said, "Lady, in this office the proper order is, bring, copy, then burn. We prefer keepsakes." "They were precise," she said, "and I will not have those words in my house." Wolfe's mouth compressed. "You are asking me," he said, "to involve myself without even the benefit of the provocateur's prose. Your finances permit you to indulge in gestures. Mine do not. If you want a vigilant husband, I regret the timing." She studied him, and for the first time I saw the edge. Not panic, not fear, a calculation. "Mr. Wolfe," she said slowly, "the 4 people who had unescorted access to my home on the dates when these trespasses occurred are, how shall we put it, unlikely to have acted for money alone. Each has a reason to want me responsive to the invitations. They are my late husband's attorney, Mr. Lyle Carraway, my late husband's protégé, a Mr. Dorian Shue, my housekeeper, Mrs. Chase, and a gentleman who styles himself a cultural liaison, Rafi Leon." "The invitations you declined," Wolfe said. "Detail them." "The first invited me to a fundraiser, ostensibly for a neighborhood arts collective that enjoys hosting musicians who never manage to arrive. The second, a private dinner with a consultant who acquires distressed businesses and likes to rehabilitate them by removing the distress and the business. The third, to lend my name to an initiative that, in practice, would give certain men the impression they had borrowed my spine. And the fourth?" She lifted a hand. "No ring." "The fourth didn't ask. It told me to leave a door open." We all took a breath. Wolfe's eyes were on her face like a jeweler's loupe. "And so," she said, I come to you, Mr. Wolfe, because if I hire a thug, we will have a contest of thugs, and that is not a sport I am trained for. If I hire the police, I will receive protection and publicity in equal measure, and I cannot afford the latter. If I do nothing, I will wake to find my existence rearranged beyond my taste. So I require a mind. Wolfe finally adjusted himself. Not much, just a fractional settling, like a weight deciding where to rest. Why, he asked, should I care about the rearrangement of your existence? She didn't blink. Because someone who enters a house to steal saffron will, given time, season the whole city. Wolfe's mouth quivered as if a fly had landed on it. He glanced at the beer and, marking the moment, lifted it for a drink. When he put it down, he said, "You speak like a woman who has read more than one book and married more than one man. You have left me to deduce too much. Mr. Goodwin, ask." I obliged. "Mrs. Sparrow?" "Miss," she said. "Miss Sparrow, who introduced you to the Arts Collective with the missing musicians. Mr. Leon, he is their patron saint, although I believe he prefers benefactor to saint. And the consultant who redeems businesses by burying them in consecrated ground. Caraway sent him. Caraway sends everyone. It's a habit. And the initiative you refuse to endorse." "Dorian Shue," she said. "He believes in young men with grey eyes and sloppy habits who simply need a mentor's wallet." "And Mrs. Chase?" I asked. "Mrs. Chase believes I should spend more time at home," she said, as if that closed an entire chapter. "You suspect one of the four," I said. "I suspect all of them," she said, "but not for the same reason. Caraway wants control, Shue wants credit, Leon wants leverage, Mrs. Chase wants quiet, and none of them are sloppy. The letters were short, the arrangements elegant, and the tin of saffron was not chosen at random. It signifies." Wolfe made a small noise not intended for publication. "Signifies what?" "That I am not to forget what I am, or, if you prefer, what I was." "And what was that?" I asked. She looked at me, and I had the sensation of a door closing on a room I hadn't known I'd entered. "A wife," she said. "The third and last of a man whose businesses were meant to be legal in public and inevitable in private. I was his social armor. I was the person people looked at when they didn't want to see him." "You propose," Wolfe said, "that his orbit continues to exert gravity after his death, and that you, a satellite, are being nudged into a new trajectory." "I propose, Mr. Wolfe, that I am being told to be useful, and that if I refuse to be useful voluntarily, someone will demonstrate to me ways in which I can be useful without my consent." The radiator sighed. The orchids upstairs were probably growing at their usual leisurely clip, unaware that the downstairs humidity was changing from conversational to meteorological. "You burned the letters," Wolfe said. "You have no photographs of the rearrangements, no fingerprints, nothing that would trouble a judge. You want me to determine whether one of these four, or some combination, is responsible, and to remove the pressure." "I want you," she said, "to change the conversation. They are speaking to me without words. I would like them to listen." Wolfe shut his eyes. I recognized the maneuver. He had no intention of sleeping on the question, just letting his brain go into that neat little back room where he keeps conclusions before they're ripe. "Fee," he said, not opening his eyes. "Fair," she said, "and fast." "Atrocious word," Wolfe murmured. "Mr. Goodwin will provide the details. I will not move from this chair for you or anyone affiliated with you. If action outside this room is required, Mr. Goodwin will take it. I will not appear in your home, your office, or any venue dedicated to the pretense of music." She nodded once. "I prefer men who don't appear," she said. "The ones who do are always the wrong ones." "Before you go," Wolfe said, "a question. Why should I believe that you are the target rather than the tether? It would be prudent for certain parties to discover whether I can be induced to reach. They know my distaste for intrusion. They know my capacity for inference. Are you a messenger or bait? If she flinched, she did it internally, where it doesn't show. "I don't know," she said. "I came because you were the only individual my husband feared in a polite way. He respected the police professionally. He feared you personally. I thought that must be useful." Wolfe opened his eyes. That did it. If he'd had whiskers, they would have twitched. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, "you will accompany Miss Sparrow home and have a look at her library, her stairwell, and her bedside table. You will speak with Mrs. Chase for 15 minutes and no longer. You will refuse coffee, accept water, and note the glasses. You will ask Mr. Carraway for a list of staff with access to the house and accept none of his suggestions. You will find Mr. Leon and determine whether he thinks of himself in the third person. You will observe Mr. Shu and report whether his eyes are grey from nature or indifference." "Understood," I said. "If anyone offers me saffron—" "Decline," he said. "If they offer you a ribbon, bring it." Vera Sparrow rose. For a second, the room had to adjust to the absence of whatever she brought in with her. She didn't offer a hand, and Wolfe didn't pretend he might take it. At the door, she paused and looked back at him. "You asked why you should care," she said. "Because someone who wants to move your salt will one day. Try your orchids." Wolfe's chin drew in 1/8 of an inch. If she knew what she'd touched, it was either a miracle or research. "Send Mr. Goodwin your address," he said curtly, as if she might have forgotten she owned a home. "And do not burn anything else, no matter how offended your sensibilities. The difference between ash and evidence is a client's impulse." She inclined her head and left, gliding past Fritz's door like a weather front going out to sea. We listened to the front door close the way you listen to a verdict. I turned to Wolfe. "So," I said, "we're taking the case for the usual reasons. Money, inconvenience, and saffron." He gave me a look. "Phooey, we are taking the case," he said, "because someone has presumed to curate reality in a lady's bedroom. That is impertinence. Also because Miss Sparrow speaks in sentences. Go dress. And Archie, yes? Should you find anything missing at her house that will not upset a policeman, steal it back. The rearranger has a taste for the symbolic. I intend to starve him." "Right," I said. "I'll pack a symbolic lunch. Anything else?" Wolfe considered the beer and let it sit, untouched again. "Yes," he said. "Do not, under any circumstances, permit anyone to move the salt." 15 minutes after Vera Sparrow left a wake in our hallway, I was in a cab writing her address on my cuff like a schoolboy cribbing geography. Murray Hill. The building had a doorman who wore his hat, with the kind of authority that insists on the full name of your guests. I gave him mine and Mrs. Sparrow's, plus the information that I was expected. He looked disappointed and rang upstairs. Seconds later, he gestured me to the elevator with a flourish reserved for ambassadors and plumbers who arrive on time. Her apartment didn't waste thought on greeting. The door opened under my knuckles, and Mrs. Chase took me in from hat to shoes, ticking boxes I couldn't see. She was trim in a dark dress that had more starch than sentiment, and her hair had been parted by a ruler. "Mr. Goodwin," she said. 15 minutes. The words were not an estimate. They were a sentence. "Then let's not waste them," I told her. "Water, please." 2 glasses. She did not raise an eyebrow, which I respected. We crossed a foyer that thought about being a small chapel and entered the library. Books had colonized 3 walls, leaving the 4th to windows that watched the city try to explain itself. The place was clean without being bullied. A piano in the corner had a cover drawn like a closed eyelid. "Here," she said, indicating the shelves. "She says a book was removed and returned. I keep the catalogue. Nothing else is missing." "You dust the piano?" I asked. "Every day," she said. I didn't tie any ribbon. I stepped to the instrument and lifted the cover an inch. The surface was immaculate. I checked for the sort of faint scuff a ribbon leaves when someone who doesn't own the piano makes art on it. Nothing obvious. There was a light scent of polish and something underneath it, a suggestion of old paper. Her father's Greek, probably. The idea of a ribbon taking a tour and ending here felt less like whim and more like a signature. "Glasses," I said. She left and returned with a tray. 2 tumblers, identical, clear, each leaving a precise circle of perspiration. She put it on a side table and placed the water in front of me like a test. I took a sip and set it down, noting the faintest lip of mineral crust on the tray's edge. The kind hard water leaves when someone isn't compulsive with a towel. I filed it as the sort of thing a person might see if they were looking very closely. "The stairwell?" I asked. "This way." The portrait was halfway up a wide flight, lit from both sides by lamps that had been moved for purpose. The man in the frame had an expression that tried for benevolent and overshot into inevitable. Handsome in the way of men who get haircuts more often than sleep. On the wall beneath, a rectangle of paler paint showed where the picture had lived before. The new position was theatrical. You had to see him going up and coming down. "Did you move it?" I asked. "No," she said. "I don't move him." "Then who did?" Her mouth settled. "Someone without respect," she said. It was almost an answer. The bedroom was a study in taste that got up early and stayed late. On the nightstand, as promised, a small tin, the sort of thing a spice wears when it wants to be jewelry. The lid was off by a hair. I bent and inhaled. Saffron has a way of making even a skeptic feel ceremonial. This was fine stuff, honeyed and metallic at once, like a coin melted into tea. The tin itself had a dull spot on the side where fingers had worried it, but the edges were clean. Whoever placed it here had washed their hands or didn't make a habit of leaving traces. "Anyone besides you and Miss Sparrow with access to the bedroom?" I asked. "Mrs. Sparrow dresses herself," she said, giving me 3 degrees below frost. "I air the room. I change the linens." "No one else." "The safe?" "In the dressing room," she said. "It was closed when I found it. I do not open it. If it had been forced, I would have called the police." "It wasn't." "Keys?" "Her own," she said. "She carries them." I glanced at the dressing room. Built-in drawers breathed money. A small safe near the floor breathed habit. No scratches around the dial. No gouge on the carpet. The kind of quiet you get when a person knows the combination and believes themselves invisible. "Thank you," I said. "That's 12 minutes. You're doing very well." She didn't like the compliment. "Mr. Goodwin, I've been with the family 13 years. I've lived through 3 funerals, 6 lawyers, and the daily visitation of men who pronounce philanthropy like a threat. I can manage 12 minutes. "Let's use the last 3, I said. "Mr. Carraway?" "Has his own key for the study only," she said. "He comes unannounced and announces himself. He likes the desk. I watch him." "Mr. Shu?" "Has charm," she said, which in her dialect was a felony. "He visits on Wednesdays and talks about the future with both hands." "Mr. Leon." "The elevator brings him to the door," she said. "He doesn't like to stand in halls. He calls this place the salon and never uses a last name unless it belongs to a painter." "Anyone else with unescorted access?" She hesitated a half-breath. "There is a handyman," she said. "Comes from the building. Name is Tim. Keys for plumbing and the electrical closet. I let him in and I watch him. He whistles." "That's 20 seconds over," I said. "You'll have to dock yourself." She compressed the corners of her mouth, which might be her version of a smile, and escorted me back to the library where the tray sat like a prop between our testimonies. "Miss Sparrow asked that you call Mr. Carraway," she said, "if you insisted on lists." "I insist," I said. She gave me a number from memory that had the rhythm of a tune you can't forget. Carraway answered himself. His voice had the dry weight of a man who bills in 6-minute increments. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, after I explained the necessity and dropped Wolfe's name where he could stub his toe on it. Access lists are privileged. Not when a client is being rearranged, I said. Names, and if you're feeling generous, dates. He breathed through his nose. Mrs. Sparrow is sensitive, he said. We are attempting to keep her blood pressure out of the papers. I applaud the sentiment, I said. Now the list. He gave it. Himself. Shu, Leon, Mrs. Chase, a cleaning service whose schedule he promised to send, the building's handyman, and a night watchman who did rounds with a keycard that registered nothing of interest. He concluded with a recommendation I declined. Don't tell her, he said, that you're asking me these questions. Mr. Carraway, she asked me to ask, I said. You'll live. I hung up and met Mrs. Chase's look. I want to see Mr. Leon and Mr. Shu, I said. Today, if possible. Mr. Leon has a hangar, she said. He keeps art there. He calls it a nursery. Mr. Shu prefers coffee shops with power outlets and women who type quickly. I can provide addresses. She did, neat on a card that smelled faintly of the drawer it came from. I pocketed it and told her to be careful with any new invitations that arrived. Don't burn, I said. Not even toast. I don't burn, she said. I simmer. In the elevator, I checked my watch. The afternoon had time left to be useful. On the sidewalk, the doorman tilted his hat as if to mark me as a recurring character. I hailed a cab and told the driver to aim at the nursery first. If someone was practicing curation with other people's things, I wanted to see his taste where he nourished it. Wolfe had said to starve the rearranger. You can't starve a man until you know his diet. The cab let me out in a section of Brooklyn that had learned how to look expensive without getting its shoes muddy. The warehouse stood between a shuttered textile plant and a yoga studio that smelled faintly of turmeric. A sign above the door read, "The Nursery," in lettering tall enough to be ironic. I told the driver to wait, which meant he would circle the block once and decide I wasn't worth the gas. Inside, the air was cold enough to remind you that art prefers to keep. Rows of canvases leaned against one another like polite conspirators. Sculptures crouched on pedestals as if hoping to avoid introductions. I had just begun admiring a bronze that looked like a dog swallowing a violin when a voice from the balcony above floated down. You're trespassing, it said, or shopping. Which is it? I tilted my head up. A man with Mediterranean cheekbones and a scarf that could have been woven from moonlight leaned on the railing. Rafi Leon, the cultural liaison himself. He had the kind of posture that suggested he was accustomed to being photographed and had practiced refusing modesty. Neither, I said. I'm Archie Goodwin. You've heard of Nero Wolfe? He came down a steel staircase with the elegance of someone descending to receive applause. Of course, Mr. Wolfe is, how do we put it, a monument of deduction. You are his ambulatory half. He smiled. Which makes you the part people remember. That's me, I said. I'd like to ask you about Miss Sparrow. At the name, the smile shrank half an inch. Vera. Always Vera. She has refused me 3 times this month. I begin to feel like an unpaid suitor. She says you invited her to a fundraiser. I did, he admitted. A small soirée. Poets, painters, the usual cluster of talent trying to inflate itself into reputation. She declined, and the evening was poor. But she declines often. She guards herself like a relic. Funny thing, I said. Every time she declines, something in her life shifts position. A book goes wandering, a portrait relocates, a safe forgets its manners. Any comment? He gave me a look that tried for outrage but landed on theatrical injury. You think me a burglar? My dear man, I collect, I commission, I restore, I do not rearrange. If I wished her to attend, I would send flowers, not thieves. Maybe, I said, but you know her well enough to know flowers wilt, and a saffron tin on her nightstand doesn't. That hit. He blinked, quick and sharp, before the smile returned. Saffron? Ah, poetic. Not my gesture, too domestic. My metaphors are larger. He swept an arm to indicate the warehouse. If I wished to remind her of her place, I would paint it 10 feet high. I let that hang and asked about the others. Caraway, a clerk with delusions of orchestra conducting. Shu, a boy rehearsing manhood. Mrs. Chase? He gave a small shrug. The housekeeper, if she wished. Vera to obey. Vera would obey. Loyalty cuts sharper than letters. I stayed another 10 minutes pretending to admire a sculpture while letting him talk. He liked the sound of himself, which was convenient. What I got from him was this: he wanted influence, not secrecy. He wanted Vera in his orbit as proof he was important enough to host her. But the undercurrent, that small blink at Saffron, told me he knew more than he would admit. I left with his card, handed like communion, and hailed a cab to the coffee shop address Mrs. Chase had supplied. Dorian Shu was there, right on schedule, bent over a laptop. He was slim, too well groomed, and had the kind of gray eyes that looked polished daily. Around him were 2 empty cups and 3 women pretending they weren't watching him type. I introduced myself. He didn't blink, didn't startle. "Oh," he said. "The detective's secretary." "Close enough," I said, sliding into the opposite chair. "Tell me about the initiative you wanted Ms. Sparrow to endorse." He leaned back, folding his hands behind his head, showing me the watch he wanted noticed. "A mentorship foundation," he said. "Young men, disadvantaged, talented. They need guidance. Vera's name would have secured donations." She declined. "She hesitates," he corrected. "Vera is a woman who has lived among wolves and believes all sheep have teeth. She doubts too much. And someone is trying to cure her doubt by rearranging her possessions?" He frowned at that. "Rearranging? What do you mean?" I laid out the book, the portrait, the saffron. He listened, and when I said saffron, his lips parted just slightly before he shut them again. "Not me," he said quickly. "I deal in futures, not spice tins." The denial came too fast. He tried to cover with a smile, but it faltered. I pressed. "You ever in her dressing room?" "Never," he said firmly. "That space is sacred." He leaned in, lowering his voice. "But Caraway. Caraway has keys. He thinks of himself as custodian. Don't be fooled by his suits. He enjoys control. If something was touched, it was with his blessing." I let him stew in his certainty, then left him to his laptop and admirers. On the sidewalk, I checked my notes. Leon dismissive, but too quick on saffron. Shu defensive, same tell. Both aware of more than they admitted. And Caraway waiting in the wings like a lawyer with a script. Back in the cab, I phoned Wolfe. He answered with the grunt that means his lips are busy holding down annoyance. "Well?" he said. "Leon talks too much. Shu talks too fast." Both flinch at saffron. Caraway still to come. Mrs. Chase is steady as a ledger but knows more than she likes. Whoever's rearranging things is precise, symbolic, and probably enjoys the performance. "Pfui," Wolfe said. "A dilettante, a mind that cannot resist commentary. Return here after you see Caraway. Bring me details and, Archie, do not, under any inducement, leave empty-handed. If you cannot seize evidence, seize words. They betray more." "Got it," I said. "You'll have words for dinner." He grunted again and hung up. I leaned back as the cab swam uptown. Caraway was next. If the lawyer kept his desk as tight as his voice, maybe I'd find what Wolfe wanted. Not just names, but the shape of the hand arranging Vera Sparrow's world. And maybe, just maybe, a ribbon to tie the whole package together. Caraway's office was the kind of place where even the chairs looked like they charged by the hour. Walnut panels, books arranged in precise alphabetical obedience, and a smell of leather that hadn't been on a cow in decades. His secretary, a woman with hair lacquered into submission, announced me without enthusiasm and waved me toward the inner sanctum. Lyle Caraway rose just enough from behind his desk to suggest verticality without actually committing. He was tall, lean, with silver hair that had rehearsed for years to catch the light at the right angle. His suit could have made testimony look credible. He motioned me to sit, which I did, careful to make the leather creak as little as possible. "Mr. Goodwin," he said, lacing his fingers. "Representing Mr. Wolfe, I presume. I trust Vera, Ms. Sparrow, has engaged you with her usual sense of dramatics." "She engaged us with a simple fact," I said. "Somebody's been rearranging her belongings. She's not laughing about it. Neither am I." He tilted his head. "Rearranging, I assume you refer to her peculiar reports of moving portraits and vanishing books. I'd say she's overwrought." "And I'd say you're rehearsed," I told him. "Let's skip the overture. You've got keys. You've got access. What's your explanation?" His smile flickered, just a hairline crack. "Yes, I have access to the study. For documents, financials, contracts, that's all. The house is her domain. I wouldn't dare interfere." "Yet someone did," I said, with delicacy. "A ribbon on a piano, a portrait spotlighted like opening night, a tin of saffron taken from her safe and set by her bed. That's more than interference. That's commentary. And you're telling me the lawyer who prides himself on precision didn't notice?" He tapped his fingers against the desk, the sound neat and sharp. "I notice everything, which is why I know this is not my doing. I may be, as you imply, rehearsed, but I am not childish. To make symbols out of household objects is not my craft." "Then whose?" I asked. He leaned forward. "Mr. Leon craves theater. He would adore the symbolism. Shue wants her name like a medal, and if he thought shifting a portrait would tilt her heart, he might. Mrs. Chase, however, is the one with daily access. Never underestimate loyalty. It can curdle." That was twice I'd heard the same note about Mrs. Chase. Once could be coincidence. Twice was sheet music. I filed it. "Let's pretend I believe you," I said. "What about the letters? You know about those?" His eyes cooled. "She mentioned them, burned them, didn't she? Typical. She thinks fire is final, but even ash has memory." That sounded like a line Wolfe would underline. I let silence hang until he shifted. People who pride themselves on control can't stand silence. It scratches. "You've been her lawyer since her husband's time," I said. "That means you know better than most how many hands were in his pockets. What's the endgame here? Control of her money, her reputation, or just her compliance?" He exhaled through his nose. Slow. Her late husband's empire was built on contracts balanced on the edge of law. Since his death, vultures circle. They need her name, her compliance, her presence. Without it, they can't sanctify their schemes. She refuses, and this childish rearranging, is meant to unsettle her. "By one of the four," I said. "Or all," he replied. "A symphony of pressure. But mark me, Mr. Goodwin, Vera is stronger than she seems. She was the one thing her husband couldn't bend." I stood. "Then let's see if someone else can. But until Wolfe calls the tune, keep your rehearsals to yourself. He doesn't like competing conductors." He didn't rise, but his eyes followed me out, steady and watchful, like a hawk too polite to swoop in front of company. On the sidewalk, I breathed deep, trying to clear the scent of controlled air. It didn't work. I called Wolfe from a payphone because some conversations don't belong bouncing off cellular towers. "Well?" he said. Caraway denies, of course. Says it's beneath him. He pointed fingers at Leon for theater, Shue for ambition, and Mrs. Chase for loyalty gone sour. He admits she burned the letters. Says even Ash remembers, and hints the pressure is coordinated, maybe all of them playing from the same sheet. A pause. Then Wolfe. A cabal, or the illusion of one. Did he betray knowledge of saffron? Not directly, but when I mentioned it, he didn't flinch. He absorbed it like a man already aware, which tells me he's in the loop whether he tied the ribbon or not. Indeed. Return here. I hesitated. Shouldn't I swing back to Vera first? See if she's gotten another letter or if anything else has gone walkabout? No, Wolfe said sharply. If she has, she will call. I want your report fresh in my ear. Then Saul, we require eyes that see what you cannot, Archie. That was my dismissal. I hung up, flagged a cab, and let the city drag me back to the brownstone. As we crossed the river, I replayed the suspects in my head like cards in a deck. Leon with his flair, Shue with his ambition, Caraway with his control, Mrs. Chase with her loyalty. Each had motive, each had access, and each had brushed against the saffron in their own way. But Wolfe was right. This wasn't just mischief. It was orchestration. Someone wanted Vera Sparrow bent, not broken. Someone who believed symbolism was sharper than knives. And if Wolfe was summoning Saul Panzer, it meant the game was about to tighten. When I reached the office, Wolfe was waiting in his chair, eyes half-lidded but awake enough to weigh me like cargo. Fritz appeared with beer, and Wolfe raised a finger without looking at him. Not yet, he said. First, Archie, tell me what they didn't say. That was Wolfe's way, not the words spoken, but the silence left behind. And I had plenty of that to unpack. I gave Wolfe the rundown without embroidery. He hates flourishes in a report, though he'll tolerate them in orchids and sauces. I laid out Leon's theater, Shue's ambition, Caraway's control, and the echo both Leon and Sue made when Saffron entered the conversation. I added the twice-voiced suspicion that Mrs. Chase's loyalty might not be the unshakable granite she pretended. When I finished, he had closed his eyes and was making the faint hum he reserves for thought too dense to waste words on. Saul, he said finally, get him here. I phoned Saul Panzer, who said he was in the neighborhood. Saul is always in the neighborhood, whatever neighborhood you happen to want, and within 20 minutes he was stepping through the office door with his usual quiet economy. Wolfe opened his eyes for him, which is about as warm as he gets. You'll assist Mr. Goodwin, Wolfe said. You will make your own observations, unclouded by his predilections. The objects in question, the book, the portrait, the saffron, are symbolic gestures, not theft. Such gestures are not meant to enrich the perpetrator, but to condition the victim. Determine how, when, and by whom. Begin tonight. Saul nodded once. Which suspect gets priority? All? Wolfe said. But start with the one who does not seek attention. The exhibitionist and the aspirant are too visible. Look beneath. That was Wolfe's way of circling Mrs. Chase without naming her. Saul didn't ask for elaboration. He looked at me. You'll keep the daylight. I'll take the dark. Sounds like a good division, I said. She's got enough rooms to play host to both of us without knowing it. Saul left as smoothly as he came. Wolfe signaled for the beer, at last, and drank as though the saffron in question had been dissolved in malt and hops. He shut his eyes again, dismissing me to my own devices, which meant I had freedom until he pulled the leash. I spent the evening combing through my notes, but it wasn't until the phone rang at 10 that the case moved. Vera Sparrow's voice was taut but measured. Mr. Goodwin, she said, there's been another. Another letter? No, another alteration. What now? My dining room. The table was set, silver polished, plates arranged, wine poured. For 12. Guests expected? Not by me, she said. Mrs. Chase swears she did not do it. She found it that way when she entered at 9. Did you burn the table? I asked. She gave a brittle laugh. No, I left it as it was. You and Mr. Wolfe should see it. I told her to hold everything in place, including Mrs. Chase, and hung up. Wolfe had been pretending to nap, but the lines on his forehead told me he was listening. You heard, I said. Of course. What's the play? Midnight supper. No, he said. You'll go. Saul may already be near. Confer with him if you can. Observe everything. touch nothing. That's the line between being Wolfe's legman and his fall guy. Observe, don't disturb. I grabbed my coat, called a cab, and within half an hour was back at Vera's building. The doorman gave me the look of a man who hadn't signed up for theater rehearsals at 10:30 at night, but he pressed the elevator button anyway. The dining room stopped me cold. She hadn't exaggerated. 12 settings gleamed under the chandelier. The silver caught the light like a challenge. Wine glasses half filled with red sat untouched, and the smell of it mixed with polish in the air. Whoever had staged this had taste and patience, and a flair for the dramatic. Vera stood by the wall, wrapped in something dark that swallowed her shoulders. Mrs. Chase hovered in the doorway, rigid as always. I walked the length of the table, careful not to breathe too close. "Everything's genuine," Vera said softly. "My silver, my plates, the wine from my cellar. Nothing broken, nothing missing, only arranged." Saul emerged from the shadows like he'd been carved from them. He'd beaten me here, of course. "Front lock untouched," he said. "No sign of forced entry. Someone had a key or was let in." "Guests of honor?" I asked. He shook his head. "The wine's been poured less than an hour. Whoever did this wanted her to find it fresh." Vera's voice tightened. "This is not vandalism. This is a message." She was right. It was staged hospitality, as if to say she was expected to host, whether she wished it or not. "Mrs. Chase," I said, "who knew the dining room was stocked like this?" "Only myself," she said. "And Miss Sparrow. The silver is locked. I keep the key. It was in its drawer when I checked." I looked at Saul. He met my eye, no words needed. If the silver was locked away and yet someone laid it out without sign of forcing, either Mrs. Chase was lying or someone had her key. "Archie," Saul murmured, "check the glasses." I leaned close. Each had a faint trace of condensation, but no lipstick, no smudge. 12 glasses filled with wine, untouched. I straightened. Whoever staged this didn't sit. They just set the scene and walked out. "And left no footprints," Saul added. "Carpet's pristine." Vera drew a breath, steadying herself. "This is escalation," she said. "They are telling me my refusal is no longer an option, that my table is theirs, my company theirs." I believed her. But more than that, I believed Wolfe would savor the detail. A dining room turned into theater for an audience of one. Symbol piled on symbol until even the saffron seemed a prelude. I told Saul to hold position while I called Wolfe. He answered at once, which meant he'd been waiting. I gave him the account. "Wine," he repeated when I finished. "For 12. Why? They attempt to compel her to host, to assemble, to be centerpiece. Not yet violence, but compulsion dressed as courtesy. Archie, do not let them reset the table. Tomorrow, bring me a ribbon, a photograph, and if possible, the cork from one of those bottles." I pocketed a cork before hanging up. Wolfe's voice had sounded almost eager. Someone had dared to turn his favorite ritual, dining, into a weapon. And that meant, at last, the rearranger had his undivided attention. By the time Fritz set breakfast on Wolfe's table the next morning, I had the cork in my pocket and 12 photographs of the dining room in my jacket. I hadn't slept much, but Wolfe had, which told me the business of wine glasses and silver had not rattled him. It had sharpened him. He ate eggs with sorrel, sipped coffee, and let me deliver the report in neat sequence, with Saul's corroboration stitched in. When I got to the part about the condensation on the glasses, he made a low grunt of approval. "You noticed," he said, as if I might have skipped it. "The condensation proves freshness. A table set to compel, not to be used." "Exactly," I said. "Whoever did it wanted Vera to feel drafted into a dinner she never scheduled." He pushed his plate back. "That is not merely a message, Archie. It is rehearsal. They are training her." "For what?" He shook his head once, slow. "We will find out." He motioned for the cork, and I set it on the desk. He turned it in his fingers, sniffed it, and set it down as though cataloguing. Bring me the ribbon from the piano, if it still exists, and acquire one of the letters, if she has not immolated the lot. She swears she burned them, I said. She burns appearances, not realities. She will have retained one, perhaps unconsciously, for her own protection. You will find it. Saul will assist. That was the plan, and Wolfe doesn't like plans delayed. By noon I was back at Vera's. She greeted me in the library, calmer than last night, but with eyes that still carried the ghost of 12 empty chairs. "You'll tell me this is nothing, won't you?" she said. "I'll tell you it's something," I said. "Wolfe wants a ribbon from the book episode." She looked at me blankly. "I destroyed it. Not good enough. He's betting you kept one, maybe tucked in a drawer or a book, telling yourself it wasn't evidence, just a keepsake." Her lips pressed together. After a moment, she crossed to a cabinet, unlocked a drawer, and drew out a thin length of satin, blue-gray, creased from a knot. She handed it over without comment. "Thank you," I said. "Now about the letters." "Gone," she said firmly. I didn't push. She believed herself, which meant the trick would be to search where belief and memory diverged. I walked through the rooms again, this time with Saul shadowing like a patient ghost. He checked the stairwell for lamp cord impressions, the dining room for fingerprints invisible to casual eyes. I turned to the dressing room, thinking less about safes and more about drawers a woman might open when distracted. It was in the third drawer, beneath a sheaf of scarves. One envelope, crumpled, as if she had half destroyed it and then relented. Typed, onion skin, words sharp as ice. "Attend the dinner. Refusal will alter more than furniture. Your place is required." That was all. No threat of violence, just inevitability. No name, no signature. I carried it to her. She stiffened, as if seeing it revived the taste of smoke. "I meant to burn that," she said. "You meant to," I told her, "but part of you wanted proof. Wolfe will need it." She closed her eyes, then opened them with a steady light. "Take it. I cannot bear it here." Back at the brownstone, I laid the ribbon, the cork, and the letter on Wolfe's desk. He examined each with the reverence of a collector. "The ribbon," he said, "was tied with care. The hand was not hurried. The cork, Chateau Margaux, 2005. Too extravagant for a vandal. And the letter," he tapped it. "Archie, note the diction. Imperative softened by civility. Attend. Required. No slang, no bombast. Someone who fancies themselves refined." "Leon fits," I said. "Perhaps. But Leon declaims." He would not limit himself to one sentence. "This is someone who resists ornament. Caraway, maybe, but his letters to clients drip clauses. Sue? Sue likes metaphors. He'd mention horizons." "Precisely. Mrs. Chase, then, a woman of loyalty, trained in brevity, yet—" He pinched the bridge of his nose. "Would she dare? Only if instructed." "So someone's pulling strings." "Yes. Someone who wishes her to comply without overt menace. A tyrant masked as a host." He pushed the items aside. "Archie, summon them all. Now. Tomorrow evening. 8 o'clock. The office. You want the whole cast in one room?" "Yes." The dinner table mocked her authority. "I will restore it here. They will sit, they will listen, and one of them will betray themselves." I leaned back. "And if they refuse?" "They will not. They crave her presence. If she invites, they will come." I phoned Vera with the plan. She listened, then said, "I will do as you ask. But Mr. Wolfe should know, whoever sets tables in my absence is not afraid of proximity. They will sit with him too." "That's what he's counting on," I told her. When I hung up, Wolfe's eyes were closed again, but the lines on his forehead were carved deeper. He was waiting for the stage to fill, knowing the performance had already begun. The brownstone was about to host its own version of the dinner, not with wine, but with words sharp enough to cut. When Wolfe summons suspects to the brownstone, it isn't a social calendar. It's a trap dressed as a parlor. I spent the next day on the phone and in motion, making sure the invitations went out as Wolfe dictated, in Vera Sparrow's name, couched as her request, but with Wolfe's weight behind it. Leon accepted instantly, too smoothly, as if attendance meant publicity. Sue hesitated just long enough to seem reluctant, then agreed with a laugh that tried to sound casual. Carraway asked if it was strictly necessary, which is lawyer for "I don't like your angle, but I can't afford to refuse." Mrs. Chase said only, "If Mrs. Sparrow asks, I will come," which was both humble and ominous. By 8 that night the brownstone was primed. Fritz had polished the silver tea service, though Wolfe had no intention of offering tea. It was props, nothing more. The red leather chairs were aligned with Wolfe's desk, the globe gleamed, and the orchids upstairs perfumed the air faintly through the open transom. Wolfe sat in his chair, mountainous, eyes half-lidded, like a magistrate whose verdict had already been signed. I took my station at the side, notepad ready, legs crossed to signal I could be casual, but not careless. They arrived in a stagger that kept the room unsettled. Leon first, scarf perfectly draped, surveying the office with an artist's disdain for someone else's taste. Sue second, crisp and polished, eyes flicking across the room as though measuring it for a future upgrade. Carraway third, every crease in his suit sharp enough to draw blood, mouth pursed against the indignity of being summoned. And finally, Mrs. Chase, whose plain black dress and controlled step gave the impression she had entered a confessional rather than a detective's office. Vera came last, in grey silk, quiet, but with that same storm silence she had brought on her first visit. They sat as directed. Wolfe let the silence expand until it pressed against their ribs. Then he opened his eyes fully and spoke. "You have all," he said, "taken liberties with Ms. Sparrow's household. Each of you in your way desires her compliance, with your projects, your ambitions, your vanities. Each has motive, each has access, and one among you has presumed to curate her life in symbols. A ribbon, a portrait, a tin of saffron, a dinner table set for 12. These are not thefts, they are trespasses of meaning, and they will stop." Leon made a small theatrical gasp, as if insulted by the accusation. "Surely you don't think me guilty of such domestic meddling. I patronize artists, not wardrobes." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "Your vanity leaves fingerprints even when you wear gloves. But not here. These gestures are too restrained. You would have written sonnets on the tablecloth." Leon flushed, which was almost as good as an admission, but Wolfe had already dismissed him with a glance. His eyes slid to Sue. "You," Wolfe said, "fancy yourself a builder of futures. You sought Miss Sparrow's endorsement. She declined. You sulked, but your metaphors leak even when you are discreet. These notes," he tapped the crumpled letter, "contain no metaphor. They are imperatives, not your voice." Sue tried a smile, but it was the kind that dies before it's born. "If I wanted her support, I would argue it, not threaten. I don't need saffron." Carraway leaned forward, steepling his fingers. "This is absurd. Vera's grief has made her see shadows. You're accusing her friends of mischief when the simplest explanation is servants or strangers." "Pfui," Wolfe said again, sharper. "A stranger would not pour Margot for invisible guests. A servant would not return a Greek text with a bow. And you, Mr. Carraway, cloak yourself in control. You prefer contracts to symbols. The diction here is curt, exact, the work of someone used to commands but not flourishes. Close to your manner, but not yours." I watched Mrs. Chase then. She hadn't moved, hadn't twitched, but her knuckles were white on the armrest. Wolfe saw it too, and his voice turned like a screw. "Mrs. Chase," he said, You had the keys, you kept the silver, you tend the safe, you alone could place objects without fear of being challenged, and your loyalty to Mrs. Sparrow is unquestionable until someone invoked her husband's memory. Her lips parted, but no sound came. Wolfe leaned forward an inch, which for him is a lunge. These acts were not to frighten her. They were to remind her, to push her back into the role she once played, ornament and hostess to power. You would not invent this alone. You were directed. By whom? The silence cracked then. Mrs. Chase's eyes darted toward Carraway. Just a flicker, but enough. Carraway's jaw tightened. Leon looked delighted, Sue looked relieved, and Vera sat very still, like a woman holding a match above oil. Wolfe let the pause ripen. Then he spoke, voice low but implacable. So, it is Carraway. He drafted the commands. He instructed the housekeeper. He seeks to compel her compliance not by threat, but by rehearsal, by staging her life until she surrenders to his arrangement. He thinks symbols cannot be traced to law, but they can be traced to motive. And yours is naked. Carraway surged, half out of his chair. This is outrageous. Sit, Wolfe commanded, and somehow Carraway did, as if gravity had betrayed him. Your late employer, Wolfe continued, trusted you to manage appearances. You believe yourself heir to that duty, but Vera is not your asset. She is not a contract to be signed. She is the widow of your underworld, and she refuses. That refusal you sought to break. You failed. Mrs. Chase whispered. He said it was for her own good. Vera turned to her, voice quiet but cutting. My good is mine to define. The room held its breath. Wolfe shut his eyes, signaling the end of the performance. Archie, he said, escort them out. Then call Inspector Kramer. He will want Carraway, and tell him the evidence is words, as always. They filed out, each carrying their own portion of shame or relief. Vera lingered a moment, meeting Wolfe's half-closed eyes. You freed me, she said softly. No, he murmured. You freed yourself the moment you came. I merely refused to let them rearrange my house as well. When the door shut behind her, Wolfe reached for his beer at last. Archie, he said, people who play host with other people's lives are thieves of the most vulgar sort. Remember that. Now, dinner. And just like that, the brownstone reclaimed its sanctity, the dining table safe upstairs, and Wolfe's appetite unimpaired. The case, like the wine, had been decanted and finished. Kramer didn't come that night, which wasn't surprising. Wolfe had me phone him with the essentials, Carraway's orchestration, Mrs. Chase's execution, the physical props. And Kramer's response was the kind of grunt you file under inconvenienced but interested. He promised to send a man in the morning. Wolfe didn't care. He had already closed the file in his head. Once the threads were tied, law could plod along with its usual knots. The suspects had left the brownstone in varying states of disrepair. Leon strutted out as if the accusation hadn't brushed him, which meant it had. Sue left with that thin smile of the relieved, though I suspected relief and guilt were cousins. Carraway departed like a man who had swallowed a nail but refused to cough. And Mrs. Chase? She walked with the same stiff dignity she had carried in, only now she knew the dignity had betrayed her. Vera Sparrow lingered the longest, thanking Wolfe with a nod that felt like resignation wrapped in gratitude. She didn't say another word until she was at the door, where she turned to me. Tell him he has restored the air in my house, she said. I told her I would. When Fritz cleared the office, Wolfe finally leaned back, the way a mountain might sigh. He drank half a glass of beer before speaking. Archie, you should note that Mrs. Sparrow is not yet free. Carraway is discredited, perhaps detained, but the impulses that produced his conduct remain in orbit. She must guard herself. That's advice she's not paying you for, I said. No, he agreed, but it is advice she will remember. The next morning Kramer arrived, red-faced and gruff, stamping mud from his shoes onto Fritz's clean mat. He didn't like the case. No blood, no smoking gun, just symbols and psychology. But Wolfe had anticipated that. The ribbon, the cork, the letter, and Saul's corroboration gave him enough to justify a charge of harassment, maybe conspiracy. Carraway would have to answer for it, and Mrs. Chase would face the fact that her loyalty had been played like a violin. "Damn nuisance," Kramer muttered in the office, staring at the evidence Wolfe had arrayed like trophies. "This isn't crime, it's art school." "Phooey," Wolfe said. "It is coercion. You call it nuisance because it lacks blood, but tell me, how many crimes begin with nuisance? A trespass of meaning is a trespass nonetheless." Kramer blew through his mustache. "You and your fancy words. I'll have him in for questioning. Don't expect headlines." "I expect," Wolfe replied, "results." That was as far as cooperation went. Kramer left, muttering about philosophers in armchairs, and Wolfe returned to his orchids with the serenity of a man whose universe had been returned to equilibrium. But Vera's words about air restored stayed with me. That evening, when the brownstone was quiet again, I thought about her house. The piano with its borrowed ribbon, the stairwell portrait lit like judgment, the safe stripped of saffron, the table laid for ghosts. Each act had been aimed not at destroying her, but at bending her back into a role she had escaped, and Wolfe had stopped it by sitting in his chair, dissecting the symbols and putting their author in chains of language. It's not the kind of justice that fills headlines, but it was enough. The case wound down over the next week. Saul reported that Leon had retreated to his warehouse, muttering about barbarism in the arts. Sue was seen with a new patron, angling for legitimacy through other channels. Carraway, stripped of Vera's trust and under Kramer's watch, was suddenly a lawyer with fewer clients than suits. Mrs. Chase stayed on in Vera's house, subdued, perhaps penitent, but bound by the knowledge that her loyalty had been used as a lever. And Vera herself, she sent a note, handwritten, thanking Wolfe in 3 sentences as precise as the letters she had once burned. She ended with, "The table is mine again." I read it aloud in the office. Wolfe listened, then closed his eyes. "She has phrased it correctly," he said. "Not her life, not her freedom. The table, that is the essence. She understands the seat of power." Fritz brought dinner, saddle of lamb with saffron rice, which I suspect was not an accident. Wolfe tasted, chewed, and swallowed with something close to satisfaction. "Good," he said. "Proof that saffron belongs to appetite, not intimidation." I grinned. "So the moral is, never let a lawyer near your spice rack." Wolfe gave me a look of pure disdain. "The moral, Archie, is that those who attempt to impose meaning on another's household invite ruin. A house is sovereign. To trespass upon it is the vilest offense, short of murder." He dabbed his lips with a napkin. "That Inspector Kramer calls it nuisance proves only that law's narrower than justice." And just like that, the storm outside had settled. The brownstone was quiet again. The office returned to its sacred rhythm. Wolfe leaned back with his beer, orchids waiting upstairs, dinner secure, and me with my notes filed. The widow of the Underworld had been tested, but she'd survived with her table intact, and Wolfe, as usual, had done it without standing up. I closed my notebook, leaned back, and let the silence sit with us. Cases end, but the brownstone endures. And when Wolfe finally muttered "satisfactory," I knew the world, for the moment, was exactly where he wanted it. Arranged, not rearranged. For a few days the brownstone slid back into its rhythm. Wolfe tended orchids, Fritz polished cutlery, and I kept the phone company. The case seemed wrapped, tied with Wolfe's verbal ribbon and filed under satisfactory. But in my line of work, satisfaction is a short lease. The first crack came 3 nights later when I got home from a jaunt downtown and found Wolfe in the office, staring at an unopened envelope on his desk. Wolfe doesn't stare at unopened mail. He either ignores it or hands it to me. This one had been slipped under our door. No postmark, no return address. Thin onion paper again. He gestured for me to open it. I slit it clean, drew out a single sheet. Same typeface, same economy of words. The table was rehearsal. The stage is larger. Refusal is temporary. I whistled. So Carraway didn't act alone. "Pfui," Wolfe muttered. Carraway lacked the wit to orchestrate beyond contracts. He was a lieutenant, not the general. That put me on edge. If Carraway was already Kramer's chew toy, this new note meant the real conductor hadn't even taken his bow. "Do we tell Vera?" I asked. "Not yet," Wolfe said. "Alarm without preparation is cruelty. We must first ascertain whether she is still the axis, or whether we have become a spoke." That last phrase carried weight. It meant Wolfe suspected the letter wasn't just aimed at Vera, but at him, for daring to intervene. The next morning I went to check with Saul. He had kept an eye on Vera's place, quiet as wallpaper, and reported nothing new. No staged scenes, no suspicious visitors. Which meant whoever sent the note wanted Wolfe rattled, not Vera. I didn't like that arithmetic. Back at the brownstone, Wolfe had me lay the new letter beside the old one. He studied them as if they were fossils. "Same machine," he pronounced. "Same ribbonware, same slight misalignment of the R. But observe. The first commands compliance directly. This one asserts inevitability, a shift in confidence, someone emboldened." "Which narrows it down to everyone we know," I said. "Not so. Leon would sign his name in italics. Shu would couch demands in grandiloquence. Carraway is neutralized. That leaves Mrs. Chase," I finished. "Perhaps," Wolfe said. "But note the diction. The stage is larger. That is not domestic language. That is theatrical, expansive. Mrs. Chase is precise, contained. No, this voice belongs to someone who wishes to direct, not to serve." "Leon again," I said. "Or someone of Leon's temperament, but with restraint enough to remain unseen." Wolfe shut his eyes. "It is intolerable." That meant he was hooked deeper than usual. The following evening, Vera herself called. Her tone was measured, but behind it was steel. "Another invitation," she said. "What kind?" "Not written, delivered in person. A man came this afternoon, elegant, foreign, said he, represented interests who admired my husband's legacy. He asked me to attend a gathering, a symposium of culture and commerce. I declined, of course. He smiled and said, 'The table is already set.' Then he left. 'Name?' I pressed. He gave none, only a card. Blank. That was enough to get Wolfe's full attention. I relayed it, and he went still, as though silence itself were a scalpel. 'Archie,' he said at last, 'you will bring the card. Tonight, and you will describe this man to Saul. If the stage is larger, then the performance is imminent. They will attempt to draw her publicly. We must intercept.' At Vera's, the card was exactly as she said, heavy stock, pure white, blank on both sides. The kind of nothing that means everything. She described the man, mid-40s, olive skin, voice smooth as oil. I left Saul with her and hurried back. Wolfe took the card between thumb and forefinger, holding it as if it carried contagion. 'Blank,' he mused. 'No name, no words, yet it conveys certainty. It is an invitation, not to a place, but to inevitability. That is audacity.' 'And dangerous,' I said. 'If they're moving her out of her house into public, it's not just rearranging furniture anymore. It's rearranging her reputation.' 'Exactly,' Wolfe said. 'They intend to conscript her presence, to seat her at a table where refusal will be impossible without spectacle. They mistake her for malleable, and they mistake me for idle. That was when the phone rang again. Fritz answered, then brought the receiver to Wolfe. He listened, grunted, and handed it to me. It was Saul. I tailed the man after he left Vera's, he said. He didn't go far, straight to Leon's warehouse. I hung up and relayed it. Wolfe's lips compressed. Leon, then. Of course. He was too flamboyant to abstain. The restraint of the letters was borrowed, dictated to another hand. He is the stage manager. So what's next? I asked. Next, Wolfe said. We wait. He has declared the stage. He will unveil it soon, and when he does, Archie, we will make him the spectacle. The brown stone fell quiet, but it wasn't the usual comfortable silence. This one held anticipation like the hush before curtains rise. Wolfe sat with his eyes closed, already rehearsing the lines he would deliver, and I knew, with the same certainty as the man who slipped the blank card, that the performance wasn't over. It was only just beginning. The curtain rose 2 nights later, though not in a theater. Leon's larger stage turned out to be a loft downtown, converted into a gallery for an exhibition nobody had been invited to, yet somehow everyone attended. Vera received a message, delivered this time by courier, a single line typed on the same machine. Tonight, 8 o'clock. Attendance inevitable. She did not go alone. She called us first. Wolfe, who had already anticipated the timing, instructed me and Saul to escort her. He himself, of course, would remain in the brownstone, the immovable general. You will observe, he told me, and you will extract. At 9 o'clock sharp, bring them here. Leon intends a performance, but the climax will occur on my stage. The gallery was all angles and spotlights, canvases hung as if on trial. Leon stood at the center, scarf glowing under the lights, speaking to a circle of admirers. At Vera's arrival, he extended his arms like a priest welcoming a penitent. At last, he declared, the widow joins her congregation. The scene was grotesque. A table set again, 12 chairs, silver-polished, wine poured. This time, not in her house, but in public, daring her to sit, daring the crowd to witness her compliance. The symbolism was obvious, vulgar in its insistence. Leon's voice carried. Here is our guest of honor. Her presence consecrates us. Vera's hand trembled at her side, but she did not sit. Instead, she turned to me and murmured, "Take me away." That was my cue. I caught Saul's eye, and together we closed ranks around her. Leon's protest followed us out, but it was only noise. Within half an hour, the whole cast, Leon, Sue, Caraway under escort, and Mrs. Chase at Vera's side, was gathered once more in Wolfe's office. He waited like a judge already holding the verdict. When the last chair was filled, he spoke. "You have each attempted to conscript a woman," he said, "not with chains, but with symbols. You presumed her house, your stage, her table, your prop, her silence, your consent. And when rebuffed, you sought to expand, to force her into spectacle. The orchestration was yours, Mr. Leon. The flamboyance betrayed you. Caraway lent you access. Mrs. Chase provided the hands, and Shue, though a lesser conspirator, hoped to inherit the spoils of her endorsement. A tawdry cabal, undone by its own conceit. Leon sputtered, tried to protest, but Wolfe cut him off with a flick of the hand. You mistook theater for subtlety. You thought compulsion cloaked in elegance was irresistible. Fey. All you achieved was to confirm your own hunger for control. The saffron, the ribbon, the staged feasts, childish, pantomimes, stripped of substance the moment they entered my sight. He leaned forward. Understand this. Vera Sparrow is not yours to rearrange. She is not her husband's ghost, nor your instrument. She has chosen refusal, and I affirm it. You will trouble her no further. If you persist, the police, though they lack imagination, will be sufficient once armed with my account. Consider yourselves dismissed from her life. if not from Kramer's docket. Silence followed, thick as judgment. Leon slumped, his scarf suddenly absurd. Sue looked small, ambition shriveled. Carraway's eyes were dark hollows of defeat, and Mrs. Chase sat bowed, ashamed. Vera did not speak, but her gaze on Wolfe was steady, almost luminous. One by one they left. Only when the door closed behind the last of them did Wolfe exhale and reach for his beer. Vera remained, standing before his desk. "You've ended it," she said softly. "No," Wolfe corrected. "I've exposed it. Ending requires your resolve, not mine. You are free to define your own table." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but close. She inclined her head and left with grace that no one could rearrange. When the house was ours again, Wolfe lifted his glass. "Archie, note it. Coercion often masquerades as courtesy. It is the most insidious form of tyranny, for it expects gratitude from its victim. To strip it bare is a service to dignity." "Not a bad epitaph," I said. "Not yet," he muttered, closing his eyes. "Dinner first." And that was that. The brownstone was quiet again, orchids breathing upstairs, Fritz laying the table. Outside, the city kept its chaos. Inside, order held. Wolfe had protected the sanctity of one woman's table, and in the process reminded me that justice doesn't always wear a badge. Sometimes it sits in a chair, immovable, and arranges words until the world falls back into place. The widow of the underworld had her freedom. Wolfe had his order, and I had my quip. At least nobody touched the salt